Like, oh, so, oh,
Yeah, going live in 10. Yeah, enjoy your talk. Have fun. That's the more
thank you.
important. You know it, right?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. We are in the brilliant Teams track at Dev Days, and my name is Mehdi Mejawi. I'm really glad to be your MC today, and I will be the MC with a wonderful guest on a great topic that a lot of people have question about. It's Stacy Cashmore. Hello, Stacy. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm not doing too bad, thank you. Thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you there at Dev Days, and it's true. Like so many people think about pair programming, it could be a boring waste of time and effort. But you will explain us how you made it work in your team, what benefits you got from it, and yes, you will tell us also more things about it. We're really excited about. Just for attendees, you know that you can ask question in the Q&A part. You can ask question, and I would love to ask to deliver your question at Stacy at the end of the talk. So don't hesitate in the QA or chat to ask your question. Stacy, are you able to share your slides with us?
Yep, let's share the slides. And let's, come on, you can do this, little computer. There we go, we have slides.
Perfect. Enjoy your time on stage, and I'll be back for questions.
Thank you, I'll speak to you soon. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is from where you're watching. And thank you so much for joining me here this morning and spending the next hour with me. I'm going to be talking about pair programming this morning, so let's get on with it. Let me start by saying I love working with my colleagues. I love it when we can bounce ideas between each other, when we can complement each other's knowledge, and when we can take those talents, we can combine them, and we can solve really complex business or technical challenges. Basically, you could say, I love working in close-knit teams. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened quite as often as I would have liked it to during my career. All too often, I've seen team members not working together, but working on different things. Now, it might be that they're working on different stories inside of the same project. All too often, I've even seen people working on completely different projects inside of one team. And they're each working on this different thing. And it's done so that they can be, sometimes because they have to be, independent from each other. And I find that an interesting word, independent, especially in a team situation, because in this situation, are we actually a team at all? Or are we simply a collection of independent colleagues working at the same island of desks? And that word, independent, it's not free. There are costs associated with that word. Inside of my team, I now have less insight into what my colleagues are doing. Outside of that 15-minute stand-up at the start of the day, I'm sure we've all been there. People are talking about completely unconnected things. And as such, we drift. We zone out. We don't even hear these updates. But this update is the only way we actually get to hear what each other's doing. And because of this disconnect, because some connection is lost between us as team members, even if we are a really close team, otherwise, that whole thing, bouncing ideas, helping each other out, becomes really hard to do. And it becomes hard because when we want to do that bouncing or helping, one of the two people has to context switch. We have to interrupt what we're doing. Gives our teams other issues as well. We now have far more work in progress. At the very least, we have one story per developer. More often than not, we have multiple stories per developer, and they all get stuck in places. And when they get stuck, we pick up something new and add that to the work in progress. And because of all of this, each story takes longer to actually get to be completed. Our lead time extends. Testing can become a huge bottleneck because everybody's working on something individually, and all of a sudden a tester might get overloaded. And as each member has their own set of stories, we also have issues regarding resilience in the team. Because if each member has their own set of stories, if they have their own area, then what happens when that team member wins a lottery, quits the next day? Maybe more realistically, they go on vacation. Or even if they're just suddenly ill for a few days. All of these things interrupt our ability to provide value to our users in a timely fashion. But I'm supposed to be talking about pair programming, and I haven't done that yet. So why do I think these are connected? Well, simply one way that I've seen that we can help teams not fall into that trap of being independent colleagues at the same island of desks is to pair program. When practiced, when it's done right, we get to work together. And I mean really together, to think of those better solutions, to have that good collaboration, and to implement value with less lead time for our users. Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore. I am Tech Explorer DevOps at Omniplan based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. We build financial advice software. I've been developing software since the mid-1990s, and for the last 2 years, I am really honored to say that I've been able to call myself a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies. Now, over my career since the mid-90s, I have worked in various different industries, various different companies, and a few different roles. During my career, I have seen lots of different ways that teams can work together. Some of them have been better than others. At my previous job, I saw the whole gamut. I saw lots of different ways that we could work together. I was there for 14 years and I started back in 2006. And on day one, we didn't have teams at all. We had a development department. In fact, my first project on day one, when I first got my laptop, was to implement this really complex algorithm in the middle of the car insurance software. And I did it by myself. Sure, we did have some bigger projects. But people were still only working on their own facet of the system. They weren't working together to complete things. And we saw the issues that this could bring, all of the things I've talked about so far. So we knew that we needed to make a change. 2012, the company introduced Scrum. We had teams with stable team members. We had responsibility for a set of products within the system. And it didn't work, to be honest. And it didn't work because we were still individuals inside of those products and inside of the projects. And even when we desperately tried to get it working, we got loads of questions from the teams. How can we all work on this same project? We're all inside the code base. Sometimes we're even inside the same file. It's merge ho. We're treading on each other's toes. It's a nightmare. It's slowing us down. This isn't working. So we experimented over the coming years and tried different ways and gradually improved. The team I was working with before I left, we really tried experimenting. We were always looking for something new, always trying to find something that was going to make it easier for us to work together as a team. And pair programming became a huge part of this. And it was an amazing learning experience to do. Now, it took a lot of effort to make it work. It took a huge amount of effort to make it work. But it also paid back dividends on that effort, not only for us as developers, not only for the team, but actually for the company itself. So if I'm standing here waxing lyrical and saying how great it is, why isn't everybody just doing this? And, well, it comes down to that effort that you need to put in. Making this work is really, really hard. And there are a few things which, if they happen, and I'm afraid they are probably going to happen when you get started, they make pairing a little bit less than great. So let's talk about the most common. I'm going to start with sleepy pairing. Now, I'm sure anybody who's tried pair programming has seen the situation I'm about to describe. You've got two people. They're working behind one computer. You have one person at the keyboard. They are working feverishly away. They're working through the problem. They're coming up with the solution in their head. They're turning that into code. They are fighting that code when it doesn't quite do what they want it to do. And they are making the computer dance. Other member of the pair, on the other hand, well, they're generally doing one of two things. Either they're just behind the person at the keyboard, staring over the shoulder, making that person typing feel really uncomfortable. Or they're a meter or more away. They're over here somewhere. They are playing with their phone. Occasionally they look at the screen, do a little, yep, before they return to Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, shooting zombies on an MMO. And I liken this situation to a long car journey. We have the driver concentrating for the whole day, looking for traffic problems, trying to figure out which way they need to go, watching the road, trying to keep everybody safe. Passengers, to be honest, they're kind of struggling to stay awake. You might have that backseat driver looking over the shoulder of the person at the steering wheel, again, making them feel really uncomfortable. You have that person that just sits, looks out of the window, spends a day watching the world go by, really. And you have that person who I'm ever so slightly jealous of, that doesn't get motion sickness. They just binge Netflix on their phone until their battery runs out. At the end of our journey, driver gets out. They stretch, they walk inside, they've been concentrating, they've got a headache. They just want to close their eyes and recuperate. Our passengers, meanwhile, they're exhausted. Not from the effort they've put in, but from the boredom that they've had sitting in the car. And so it is with our developers and sleepy pairing. That person doing the heavy lifting, sitting at the keyboard, typing all of those words, they're more tired than they normally would have been, which is a little bit odd because they've had the same workload as the day before. But now they've had that workload with somebody watching every key press they've done, not being able to relax, and not having any help with what they were doing, feeling judged the whole time. That person watching over the shoulder, they're exhausted. Don't underestimate how tiring it is to watch somebody else develop software whilst you're not actually involved. But they're exhausting with this feeling that this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing with my time. And that person a meter away, well, they have an awesome score on that zombie MMO game. But they also know that's not what they're paid to do, and it's not what gives them energy in their job. Either one of our people watching, they feel useless because of this. And so the next day, everybody returns to their own machines. Assuming we're allowed back into the office, we'll put on our noise-cancelling headphones to drown out the open plan. We go back to working independently. Previous day, complete waste of time. You know what? So's pairing in general. But it's not only that person watching the code that can be sleepy. The drivers can be sleepy too. And the results, they are just as bad. And it happens when pairs start to use the driver and navigator roles. So what are these roles? Well, we have a driver. That is the person at the keyboard. They are entering the code into the system. You have a navigator. They're the people solving the problems. They are telling the drivers what they need to type. Doing this gives us instant benefits. That sleepy person watching, the one that's taken the navigator role, neither the yupper nor the zombie killer can do either of these two things. They have to be actively involved in the solution, or the driver can't drive. We have involvement from all parties. We are working together to solve problems. We have the navigator coming up with ideas, figuring out how to solve the problems. We've got the driver listening to the solution and putting that code into the keyboard. It kind of sounds idyllic. People around the typist are now actively involved. We have no more yupping, and we have no more zombies. I'm not too sure about that. I think that there is a zombie in this situation, and it's not in the MMO game anymore. It is the typist. And I've been using that word deliberately. The typist is sitting behind their keyboard and they are banging the words and the symbols that the navigator tells them to type. But all this time, they're not thinking about what they're typing into the computer. Have you ever seen stories about drivers using satellite navigation and they end up at the wrong destination? They're going along and they take everything that that navigation system says and they do it without thinking. They end up lost. Maybe they end up in the middle of a field. In the worst cases I've read about online, they end up in water, or in one case, even in the wrong country, because the driver didn't realize that there was the same street and the same town in two different joining countries, and they never bothered to check where they were going to. The navigation system says, "You have arrived!" And you, the driver, think, well, maybe. Where am I? How did I get here? Why are my feet wet? And with our pairs, at the end of this day, we have that person who's done all the thinking and they are exhausted. Not only are they exhausted, they are also totally frustrated at how this day has gone. Because while they have been thinking about how to solve the problems, they've been held up waiting for that person to type. They've been held up because that person doesn't have their IDE set up as the navigator would use. They're not using the shortcuts that the navigator would use. They're not able to jump around as a navigator wants to jump around. But they also can't continue coming up with a solution in their head because otherwise they're going to have this huge disconnect with the driver and everybody's going to be lost. And the typist, bashing the keys, not thinking what they're doing, they're also exhausted. Yesterday, the typist was exhausted because they were doing all of the heavy lifting alone. Now they're exhausted thinking, I really didn't become a developer just to put somebody else's words into a computer. I'm not including Stack Overflow in this. That's still allowed. And so the next day, we return to our own machines. Put on the noise cancelling headphones again, drown out the open plan office, and we go back to working independently. Previous day, it was a complete waste of time. And you know what? Except for really seriously complex problems, so is pair programming. Now, these two issues, the sleepy navigator, the sleepy driver, teams can find it really hard to continue. And my experience has been in teams that we have reached these stages multiple times and then stop because breaking through is so difficult. They're also used as some of the biggest reasons for companies and even developers to say it's just simply not worth it. It is too costly to pair, to give up before we even start. But there are things we can do. We can help this situation. We can make it so that pairing not only works, but pays those dividends that I've been talking about. So let's tackle the sleepy navigator first. When we really got into pairing, we noticed something, and it was the world is full of distractions. Some of them are in the real world. You are sitting at your desk, and, well, two desks down, you've got people talking really loudly. Maybe they're having an ad hoc meeting. Or you're in that open plan office and somebody walks past you in your peripheral vision and they pull your attention to them. Even worse, if you're a navigator, but also a software developer, people see that you're not typing on a keyboard and they assume that you're not busy and they can interrupt you. Because, of course, as a software developer, if I'm not touching the keyboard, I'm not busy. Some distractions, they're not in the real world, they're virtual, like our phones. Most of us in this day and age, we're kind of addicted to our phones. I know that I am. They provide a whole world of distraction for us. Email, Slack, Teams, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, TikTok, Instagram. We get dopamine hits every time we check these applications, and there have been studies that show that the actual structure of our brain changes with all of these interactions that makes it even harder to put that phone down. And if we're not busy actively typing at a keyboard with our fingers, it can be so easy to give in to that distraction and pick up the phone just to check. Normally, when I give this talk in person, there's one or two people looking up really guiltily right about now, and I have to thank them for that because it really brings a point home. Now, I can only speak for me on how I solve this point, because this is a very personal problem to each person, and you're going to need to figure it out how to solve it by yourself, I'm afraid. But this is what worked for me. First of all, I tried to put the phone out of reach, just to kind of get rid of it a little bit. That didn't work, because what happened is I reached over, I brought it back, I checked it. I reached and put it back on the table next to me again. Great for the daily workout, not so good for stopping the distraction. I realized I actually had to get rid of it completely. And at the time, I was working in the office and I was sitting opposite the person that I paired with quite a lot of the time. So I got my phone and I very gently tossed it underneath the monitors onto my desk. Carefully, glass smartphone, not a Nokia 3310. And the impact on me was instant. It hurt. It was awful. Like I say, I know I'm addicted to my phone, but it did also work. And after a while, the pain went away and I could concentrate way better than before. You know what? Most of the things that I was checking, they just weren't urgent. Twitter, WhatsApp, TikTok, it's all FOMO. It's all fear of missing out and habit. The actual one that took the most time to get rid of was the stress about email. And that took time because when I'm working at my own machine, if an important email comes in, I get a pop up on my screen. That's an entirely separate discussion about whether or not that's a good idea, but it was there. And I could see if an important email came in so that if someone needed something urgently from me, if there was a question that had to be answered now, if we had a major issue and I needed to be involved in the solution, if production's on fire and the website's down and I need to do something, I know about it. I can act on it. It's fine. When pairing, I don't get those emails on my desk, but I could check my phone. Well, now I don't have my phone either, and stress. But I came to realize, after a while, it's fine. I don't need to check my emails for urgent things, because you know what? If something is that urgent that me not responding instantly is going to be a problem, people are going to find me. They're not just going to send an email and ignore it. They are going to find me if I'm not answering. And if they don't come and find me, it's just proof that it's not that important. So we could remove these distractions, we could get into the flow, we could work better as navigators, but we still need to take care of that sleepy driver and become the team that we want to be. Now, whereas the sleepy navigator is a very personal thing that I had to solve, getting rid of the sleepy driver became more of a team effort. We needed that joint effort to work through. First thing that we did is re-examine the definitions and we tightened them up by adding just a little bit more text to them. So we had the navigator, someone who thinks of a solution. But they don't tell the driver what to do at a key press level. No, they explain their idea to the driver. And they do that until the driver understands enough about the proposed solution to be able to write their code. And as a driver, as someone who listens to the navigator, tries to understand what the navigator is trying to explain, and then tries to turn that understanding into code. And they put their code into the computer that the navigator can check real time. Let's return to our driving metaphor one last time. When you're driving, when you're using a satellite navigation, your job isn't to just listen to it and do what it says without thinking. Your job is to take those instructions, to think about it, to check they're right. Most importantly, to check that they are safe to use and to make sure that you get yourself, your passengers, and your vehicle to the correct place and safely. And so it is with the driver in pair programming. You don't just follow instructions and put that if statement on line 19 with that space after the curly braces. You listen and try and understand what the navigator's trying to achieve. And when you don't understand what they're trying to achieve, it's simple, we don't code anything. And the navigator, they need to make sure the driver understands, like I say. And when that understanding isn't there, you need to figure out how to explain it differently. You might even need to step away from the computer, go to a whiteboard, do some drawing, and make sure that you are both on the same page before you continue. What you don't do, and what I've seen in the past, is quickly grab the keyboard and say, let me just do this. I give you the keyboard back in a second. Because as soon as you do that, you are back to sleepy pairing. You have one. And as a driver, you understand what the navigator is going to do. At some point, you're going to have a click. You are going to have this amazing idea. You now know exactly how to solve this problem. What you don't do in this stage is just start typing your undoubtedly awesome solution into the computer. Rather, you excitedly give the keyboard to the navigator. You tell them about your amazing idea. You switch roles and you become the navigator. Because again, if you start typing, you are going to lose the navigator because you're no longer involved in this process. That navigator is going to go back to sleep because they don't know what you're thinking. They're just watching you type on a keyboard and they're asleep again. If we ensure that each person fulfills the roles in these ways without distraction, being an active pair, then we move from sleepy pairing into strong pairing and we start to see all of the cool stuff that comes with it. This is all awesome. But we've just come off the back of 2.5 years of lockdown. We're not necessarily back in the office full time, and many people have seen that they actually like the idea of remote work and they're not planning on going back. So let's talk about, can we pair remotely for a few minutes? First time I gave this talk, it was 2020. It was actually my last conference before lockdown, and I was lucky enough there to be asked to take part in .NET Rocks Live at the same conference. And of course, we're talking about pair programming because that's what my talk was on a day earlier. At some point, either Carl or Richard asked me something about pairing remotely. And that was a complete curveball for me. It's not something I'd spent time thinking about. And if you listen to that episode, I think you can tell because my answer starts with, well, I've done it once and it did actually work well. My colleague and I were busy pairing in the morning, but I needed to be at home in the afternoon. At that point, our machines didn't have audio because of reasons. So we were communicating through Slack, sharing our screens to work together, and it was hard, but it worked. Even in that situation, it did actually work. But I followed this up with a proviso. I think it will only work if you have the psychological safety in place before you pair, because you need that psychological safety. When you're pair programming, you have to be open about not understanding things. You have to be open about sharing ideas. You have to be open about the limitations of your knowledge and for feedback. All of this is hard. Now, that colleague I was pairing with, we had an awesome relationship full of psychological safety. We could work together really well. In fact, we worked together too often. I should have paired with other people too. So, all of the hardships offered by that woefully inadequate setup that I had, they just didn't hit us that hard. But I assumed that without that trust, without that safety, 3 weeks before lockdown. Ha 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 ha. Let me add to this. At this time, I was also changing jobs. In fact, I got back from that conference and started a new job the next day. And I spent the next 3 weeks learning to know my colleagues and annoying them, if I'm honest, because I joined to help them change the way that they work. And nobody actually likes that. And then 3 weeks later, after annoying them all, I'm suddenly working from home. To my surprise, people started to pair. Teams started to get mob sessions going, and they were working this way the whole day, remotely, without building up that trust. Because believe me, they didn't do this in the office. And you know what? It still worked. People actually started to enjoy their pairing sessions. It gave them a connection which they missed from the people in the office. When they're in the office, they might not have paired together, but they'd go and have coffee, they'd go and have lunch, they'd take breaks together. They were missing this, and they used the pairing sessions to replace that connection. It did give some challenges, and whilst I'm not going to go too in depth, I don't think our talk on pairing in these times is complete without it. Firstly, sleepy pairing, much, 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 much harder to avoid. The whole team had to work really hard to make sure that everybody was engaged because it's so easy when remote and staring at a screen to just tune out. People disappeared from the streams, not joining in, but also not being noticed. They were on mute, the video was off. They had a feeling that they couldn't contribute at this time, so they sat silently and people couldn't see the body language going on screen. People are watching a possibly blurred window with code which is shrunk and stretched in weird ways because some people are using 4K monitors, some people are using widescreen monitors, and it makes it very difficult to follow. And so they fade away. Like I say, in the office, you can notice this. You can maybe spark something to get them back in the session. You can suggest a drink, a walk, a break. When you can't physically see the other person, that's just so much harder to do. Like I say, they fade away and they're gone. Also, we're not in the office. Those distractions are so much harder to avoid. It's so much easier to sit there surreptitiously with your phone. You've got nowhere to throw it. And yeah, you give in more easier than normal. Switching roles also didn't happen as often as we'd liked. And that was mainly down to the fact that it's so hard to switch roles when you're remote. It's hard when you're next to each other. But if you're remote, you can't simply give that keyboard away. So probably what you've got to do is make a commit. Hopefully it's working. Push it to the repo. The other person pulls the repo. They open up the solution. And then what were we doing again? Why did we decide to switch? And all of these context switches, they just make it harder to continue. Because of this, the driver can also get more sleepy. Um, they try and force the other person to do the solution, and they fall into that tired way of just typing in the code that they want to type in. You lose sight of the rest of the room. Not only that, but it is harder to bounce ideas remotely. In the office, if you've got two people giving their ideas, it's difficult to follow. If you're using Teams or Zoom, it's even harder because the software adds an extra layer of complexity on top of it. To try and deal with this, to try and help with these things, we tried various ideas. Number one, live share. Whether we were using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, we could actually share our code using this tool. And the experience has been interesting, sometimes awesome, sometimes profanity inducing. When it works, though, it's great because I'm no longer looking at somebody's widescreen monitor on my 4K screen, which is never a fun experience. I'm using my monitor, my IDE, my setup, my extensions, my fonts, and whenever I get the aha moment, I can take over without having to do all of that context switching. And when not able to use live share or a tool like that, we started to use the Pomodoro technique, making sure that every 25 minutes, somebody else took over the driving, somebody else took over the navigating, and you have to pay attention because next 25 minutes, it could be you that has to join in. Wasn't perfect, but it did keep people engaged at least. Finally, when we had more than two people in a session, someone would try and take on the role of devil's advocate, asking questions even if everybody agreed to make sure that we were on the right track. If noticing that people were not joining in, they would ask them, are they okay? And it worked. It actually produced half decent results. It is still harder than in the office, but if the discipline is there, it can work really well. And I know multiple teams and pairs that use this as their default way of working now. And even teams that are going to carry on using this when they get back into the office because they see the benefits. So let's talk about the benefits that I see now. First of all, collaboration. We now work together. We're not working on different things. We are working on one thing to try and get it finished. We are bouncing ideas between each other. We are helping each other improve, helping our domain knowledge, helping our tech stack knowledge, improving the way that we use that tech stack and that domain knowledge to solve the problems that we have to solve. We are using our joint talents to solve problems together. We communicate more and we communicate in a better way. This one's a little bit chicken and egg. I don't know if we improved our communication and so we improved our ability to pair program, or we improved our ability to pair program and our communication evolved organically as it did. Either way, it has improved. And that means that we are sharing knowledge so much more. And we're sharing it more because we're sharing it by default. So when that person wins the lottery and quits the next day, or goes on vacation, or is ill, it's an issue, but it's not the issue that it was before. Because we're pairing, there's always at least one person that knows what's going on inside of that story, inside of that task. And they can start a new pair at this point, and they can spread the knowledge yet again. We also noticed that we could improve our pull request process, and this one proves to be a little bit controversial sometimes, but we made it smoother and we made it simpler by making it an ongoing process. When the navigator is coming up with ideas on how they're going to solve the problem, the driver, when they understand what the navigator is trying to achieve, can validate those thoughts, can validate that solution. And they can do that in real time at the point where the solution is proposed. And the navigator, they can validate the code that the driver's producing. Is it good quality code? Is this how I would construct this? Do we need to have a discussion about whether or not this is going to be maintainable? And again, they can do this real time as the driver is producing it. So when it came to the pull requests, and we tried to keep our pull requests smaller and more manageable when we did this, what we would do is double check the changes that we've made, the commit that we want to push into our repo, make sure that nothing has snuck in, as it always can do. Make sure this is really what we want to push to the main branch. And it's really important that you don't skip that step, because if you do skip that step, all of the benefits I'm talking about for the pull request kind of disappear in a puff of smoke. And then when we've double checked our code and we know that what we're pushing in is correct, we make our PR together. Navigator then goes to their machine, they approve it, we grab a drink, and then look at what task we want to do next. And that was so much better than the old way we used to do pull requests, because we'd make a pull request and we'd throw it over the fence at somebody. They would then have to decide, am I going to make that other person wait, or am I going to interrupt what I'm doing myself right now? Eventually, they're going to look at it and they're going to throw it back. And when they do that, I'm now starting on something else. Am I going to make them wait for my answers, or am I going to interrupt myself? And this ping pong can continue until the pull request is approved. And it costs time, effort before we actually get things into the hands of our users, which is the only place they start providing value. Not only that, if they find something that needs changing, I've already finished everything. I've started something new and now I'm changing my code again. And even worse, what happens if what they're suggesting is a fundamental change and your whole pull request is about to, yeah, be interesting, shall we say? When we're pairing and when we're doing things on the fly, we just don't get those context switches. And we don't get those context switches because as we are validating in real time, as we are thinking if this is the solution we want to use, as we're putting code in and the navigator's checking that this is the solution we want to use, we get to stop at that point and say, nope, let's take a step back. Let's rethink this. Let's check what we're doing. And we can do that before it becomes the big problem. If you do it right, the only context switch that we had when pairing with pull requests is when we actually went and got that drink and started the next story. You know what? That's kind of acceptable. The last benefit I want to talk about is one that I didn't actually think of when we first started pairing, but it became really useful. And that is the onboarding process. When you started a new company, it is always such a daunting task. You get shown around an office, you're nervous, you're meeting people you don't know, you're introduced to hundreds of them, and you forget their names instantly. You get a machine. You get a big stack of paperwork, which might be paper, it might be several wiki pages that you've got to read. And you then spend time trying to learn the system, trying to become productive. It can take days or weeks. Some companies, they've not expected developers to be productive for months because of the complexity. Well, how about we do something different then? After the person has been around and forgotten everybody's names, after they've got their machine working, put them with an existing person in their team. Get them to pair together rather than going through documentation. The newbie, they get all of the insights and experience from their partner. How the domain works, where to find the code, how the solution is set up, how the team develops code, why certain choices have been made in the past, where in that big pile of paperwork you can find this particular bit that we're working on so you don't have to dig through everything every time. And it's not only the newbie that gets insight here, their partner with the experience of the project. They get clear insight that only someone with no preconceived thoughts can have about a project when seeing it for the first time. Do not underestimate the value that that can bring to a pair. No. This pair is not going to be as productive as an experienced pair, but they are going to get there and they're going to get there reasonably quick. And whilst they're getting there, they are going to be far more productive than leaving someone with that pile of paperwork at the start. Now, you may have noticed I get excited about pair programming. I love it and I love advocating for it. And I get asked why. And I want to paraphrase G. Paul Hill on Twitter here in what he says about TDD. Why do I love it? Because we're in this for the money. When practiced, when done correctly, pair programming gets value into the hands of our users faster. And it gets that value there with more thought put into it, into both how it works and into how it's built. I love pairing. I love pairing with one person. I love pairing with multiple people. I love it because of the benefits that I see that it can bring us as an individual, as a team, and inside of the company. Make no mistake, this is seriously hard. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it already. and I wouldn't be talking to you about it. But I invite you to give it a go. Put that effort in at the start. Go through those sleepy stages, figure out what you need to do to make it work for yourself, and see what benefits it can bring you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stacy. We have time for, I think, really one question from Magda. Would you advise to write all code during pairing? If not, what ratio of personal coding versus pair programming would you recommend? And how to decide feature is good candidate for pair programming? So
And
first, would you advise to write all code during pairing? If
yeah,
not, what ratio?
no, I would advise writing all code in pairing. And because of what I was saying about that pull request flow, I actually had this conversation with a couple of colleagues previously, and we had a change, and it was literally make this change in a HTML file. You don't need two people to think along with that, obviously. However, it still had to go through that whole PR process to get it into production. And the lead time and the context switching actually made sense to just have those two people doing it so that you can instantly push it out and get it into the hands of the users. Was it needed for the code? No. Was it needed for the lead time? Absolutely. So I would recommend doing this for all of the code.
So the question, how do you decide which feature is good candidate for pair programming? If you do everything in pair programming, you don't decide, right?
Yep, you just do it.
Yep, just do it. Last question. In pair programming, one engineer plus one engineer equal two is less than two or more than two.
I would say that it's more than two. I get asked a question a lot, is it just a waste of time? You've got two developers, you've got one keyboard, they're not going to be typing twice as much code as two developers at two different keyboards. But that's fine. My job as a developer, the code is the smallest part of my job. As a software developer, I want to be solving people's problems. And for that, you need knowledge about the tech, knowledge about the domain. You need to be able to think about the solution. And that is where the power comes from this pair programming, being able to do that together and being able to, like I say, get that lead time down on getting it out to the user.
It seems it's pair thinking and writing code, but what do you see? Yeah, connection issue. Thank you very much. We answered all the question. Thank you very much, Stacy. It was great. A lot of love the slides, love the enthusiasm. We will end the session and we will be back for next talk in a few minutes. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you for having me. Bye bye, everybody. Have fun.
Bye.